Ladies and gentlemen, members of City Council, please attend the call meeting of the City Council to be held in the 6th floor conference room, 801 Crawford Street, 5 p.m. Tuesday, July 8, 2014, for the purpose of a public work session. In addition, you may consider a motion to go into closed meeting by order of the mayor. Mr. Cherry?
Here.
Mr. Edmond?
Here.
Mr. Meeks? Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Ms. Randall? Mayor Wright? Mr. Rowe?
Thank you, Deborah. Tonight we have a very, very comprehensive briefing on the new state budget for the biennium 2014-2016. As you know, the state budget's on a 2-year basis. Russell, can you close that door, please? Thank you. Pardon me. And so they look at their revenues for a 2-year period of time. Next General Assembly, 2015, they'll come and make amendments to the budget that they adopted for this 2-year period. You know the long history about this, that the General Assembly, when it came time to adjourn, did not have a budget in place because of disagreements between the General Assembly and the governor's office. And the budget wasn't adopted until well after our budget was adopted. Its state budget typically is adopted first before any local government budgets because there's local government money in here. There's money for public education, state aid to local governments. So all of that was unsettled even after we adopted our budget. The state only adopted their budget last month. Now, in between the time that they would have normally adjourned and when they adopted the budget, the Secretary of Finance for the state, we'll show you this in the presentation, but this is an important thing, made a report to the money committees. That's the House Appropriation Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. And he predicted over the next 2-year period a reduction in state revenues, now hold on to your hat, of $1.55 billion. Now, like it or not, as the state economy goes, so goes the economy of the local governments, because we make up the state. They made some predictions that the income tax would come in higher than what it was. And you know how that works. We withhold income tax for both the federal government and for the state government, so they get their money periodically. Well, they had predicted a very high amount, and it came in lower, not only lower than the projection, but lower than the previous year. And so there's some ominous stuff that's on the horizon over the next 2 years. And the state has elected to be very cautious about adopting their budget, that the ice really looks thin, and we don't want to go crashing through the ice. And I recommend that we take that attitude too, that there's thin ice there. The state of Virginia has not fully recovered from the recession. You'll see a graph here tonight that shows that we're not tracking the employment rates, the creation of new jobs that's happening nationwide. That curve is going up. The Virginia curve is going down. And so it's not a place to be a risk taker budget-wise. This is not the time to make risky decisions, to bet that the money's going to be there. Literally, the best advice is to have the money in your hand before you spend it. So first, I'm going to make an apology up front because this is a long briefing, but it's a big budget. It has an impact not only on the state and the state's economy, but it has an impact on our budget. And it will impact tonight. You may hear from people who are part of our community that want you to give them a salary increase. And I see 2 members of the the Sheriff's Department, and I'm not picking on them, but constitutional officers, you'll see here, there were zero salary increases for state employees, for constitutional officers, and their employees. That's one of the ways that the state came and balanced their budget. So, with that, all that good news, I'm going to ask Sherry to go ahead and start this presentation. And as with all of our presentations, because this is kind of detailed, feel free at any point to stop, go backwards, let us expound on any question that you've got. Go ahead.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Mayor Wright, members of council, city manager, and staff. Before I begin this presentation, I'd just like to say that I'm getting over something, and so if my voice is a little bit raspy, if I have to stop to go up and take a sip of water, please bear with me. My purpose to come in front of you this evening is to explain the budget actions that were taken by the 2014 General Assembly, explore potential impacts to the city's budget based on the actions taken by the state, and consider the next steps. John gave you a good overview, and all of you are familiar pretty much of what happened. This slide basically just talks about the embedded budget battle that didn't end until the 12th of June with the passage of a state budget, and it was signed by the governor on the 21st. Several of the governor's line item vetoes were upheld on the 23rd. The adopted budget does not include an expansion of Medicaid. It also includes disputed language that says that basically that the governor cannot expand Medicaid without the General Assembly's input. And the governor is disputing that. That was one of the vetoes that was not voted on because the Speaker of the House ruled it ungermane. And so the governor remains committed to move forward with Medicaid expansion and will unveil an administrative plan by the 1st of September. The adopted budget that they picked they consider it a placeholder, and they continue to use the February revenue forecast, even though it is known that the general fund revenues will not meet the previous February forecast targets.
This is very important. They're saying that it's not so much the formula A plus B plus C equal D. It's the variables that go into the formula that are either overestimated or not giving results that track. The forecast doesn't track with the actual results.
Exactly.
For example, they may be too aggressive on and making an estimate about unemployment rates, that they may be actually higher than what the estimate is. You realizing that the formula presents results that are not accurate, they're using that for this budget with the look to revise it going forward.
Thank you, John. So to expound on that a little bit further, the retention of the February revenue forecast was necessary in order for the General Assembly to adopt a budget by July 1st. Without it, they couldn't go into the rainy day fund. This time, they estimated that this $350 million shortfall for FY14 will trigger a reforecast for the biennium. And if the reforecast process determines revenues are at least 2% below the official revenue forecast in the newly adopted budget, the use of the Revenue Stabilization Fund, or otherwise known as the Rainy Day Fund, will be allowed. The use of this fund is going to offset the FY14-16 shortfall, currently estimated to be at $1.55 billion. Although the FY14-16 enrolled budget does not technically reduce the revenue forecast, it does anticipate a revenue forecast reduction by creating a revenue reserve of $842 million from a series of spending reductions, balances, and revenue increases and decreases that they did in combing through the budgets to try to come to a way to balance the budget. And the remaining $707 million in reduced revenues are expected to be covered by the state's rainy day fund.
Stated in terms that make sense at the local level, they're using fund balance to balance the budget. Okay.
So to take it down, look at it a little bit deeper, we're going to go back to a couple of key dates that occurred during the General Assembly and for the budgeting process. So the December 2013 General Fund revenue forecast for 14 assumed a very moderate 1.7% growth rate. The growth rate for 14 and 16 biennium assumed growth rates of 4.2% in 15 and 3.9% in 16, and that was inclusive of any tax policy changes. However, during General Assembly session in February, which was mid-session, there was a reforecast, which led to them seeing that there was going to be a $125 million general fund reduction in the 14 forecast, and the overall growth rate for the year was then lowered to a 1% from 1.7% growth rate. It was acknowledged at that time that achieving the FY14 forecast was heavily dependent on non-withholding payments collections, which are backloaded in April and June quarter. So the downward adjustments in mid-February were made to estimated payments to withholding and corporate income taxes. The only thing that wasn't changed was the adjustment to withholding of $15 million because Governor McAuliffe at that time chose not to do that adjustment for the biennium.
Translated, we got some bad news here. Let's see if the last quarter of the fiscal year will help us out. And as it was, it didn't, as you'll see.
So, moving forward to May, based on the May to year-to-date collections, the revenues for FY14 were trending $350 million below the mid-February forecast. So we've gone from a $125 million general fund reduction to a $350 million general fund reduction. And it's largely dramatically lower income tax dues and estimated payments is what caused that. And while some reduction in final payments was expected, forecasters did not expect a 45% reduction. It's now clear that significant income was shifted into tax year 2012 from tax year 2013 due to federal tax policy shifts. What they're basically saying is that people who make a lot of money kind of move their money around in capital gains so that they could miss some of the taxation that was coming down in 13, and it's kind of snowballed into this. So if you see the income tax due, final payments collection in millions, you can see between 14 and 12, we're below right now in 14 to 12 collections statewide. And the FY14 budget assumed a FY14 year-end balance of $478.6 million, and largely from previous fiscal year surpluses. These balances were enough to cover what is now the now expected $350 million FY14 shortfall, but without the changes they made, it would reduce the available funding or the carryover funding for the biennium to $128 million rather than $478 they were looking for, they had anticipated. So moving on, the other revenue problem for FY14-16 budget is income tax withholding. Trends are indicating that original FY15-16 forecasted growth of about 4.3% a year will not be met. Currently, payroll withholding is around 2.5% and trending down. Year over year, there is essentially zero job growth in Virginia and negative growth in high-paying businesses and professional jobs. Job growth that's occurring is in lower-paying leisure, hospitality, and healthcare jobs.
Let me stop right there. If you were to ask one of our neighbors, your next door neighbor, what is the biggest tax that you pay to the city, you most likely will get the answer, real estate tax. Ask yourself or ask your neighbor, what tax do you pay to the state? What's that equivalent tax? And it's the income tax, and that's what we're talking about here. The income tax, which is the withholding tax, is not tracking on the estimates that they had projected. And you'll see a graph that shows why.
And also, as a side note,
and this, yeah, the jobs that are being created, and apologize.
No, go ahead.
Isn't she great?
It's a tag team effort here.
She really is.
Excuse me.
We do this so often that
She's got an excellent helper. Right?
Yes. I couldn't ask
Take
for
a
more.
sip
I
while
couldn't-
he's
I am.
talking.
Go ahead,
Right. Fix your throat while he's.
all right.
Thank you.
The jobs that are being created are not high-paying jobs. They're not the ones that generate a lot of income tax revenue.
Thank you. As a side note, a June 13th article in the 24/7 Wall Street on 10 states with the slowest growing economies identified Virginia as the third slowest, edging out Maryland and Alaska. As a side note. So year over year, there's essentially zero job growth in Virginia. The Virginia payroll trends are the result of our high reliance on federal spending, especially in the areas of declining defense spending. And as you can see there is a significant drop between 12 and 13. And the lower carry forward balance and the revenues from FY14 combined with the lower expected payroll withholdings in 14 is what's producing this anticipated $1.55 billion revenue shortfall.
Yeah.
Now, and I would like to, right here, just to say that
Wow.
they are not even sure if it's going to be more or less at this point, so everything is very tentative. This graph from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows exactly what we were just saying. You see, the light blue is Virginia. That's the job growth in Virginia compared to the darker blue line, which is the national job growth. And as you can see, we're trending down.
Yeah, isn't that great? Here's the national trend line is going up, and we're like a roller coaster on the dive. Yeah, it's not too great.
So how are they going to address the shortfall? The General Assembly went back to introduce budget. They looked at the amendments from the House and the Senate, which is House Bill 502 and Senate Bill 503. They thoroughly scrubbed all of the budgets and all the amendments and removed most of the new spending that was included in all of them. And a few priority areas were taken into consideration and spared, which are listed here. And as you see at the bottom of the list, they did their best as they could to minimize direct impact cuts on local government. Spending cuts and additional balances and revenue adjustments compared to the introduced budget funded, they provided them an $842 million revenue reserve in their adopted budget, which I mentioned earlier. The adopted budget, as I mentioned earlier, also implicitly assumes the ability to use the rainy day fund for $707 million. And this last bullet just kind of says where they pull some of the reserves from. They recaptured some of the funds from the transportation that hadn't been used. They delayed the elimination of the accelerated sales tax payments for businesses for certain businesses, reinstituted early payment for certain businesses, and then they swapped capital outlay funds for debt.
Moving money. Yeah.
And spending on items such as Medicaid utilization and debt service continue to outpace growth in general fund revenues. Therefore, the local relative share of state general funds and lottery revenues, which is where aid to localities comes from, is continuing to decline. In the 2014-16 biennium, state aid declined from 46.2% to 45.7% of the general fund budget. So this translates into most areas of the state aid for locality administered programs being either level funded or only on receiving a small increase over the next biennium. This next chart gives you a good sense of the various programs that we receive aid from the state to implement the programs. And if you just look across the bottom there, you can see that from 8 to 10, we went from 51.9% of the state general fund and aid to localities all the way down to 45.7%.
Now, this is the important thing. These are some of the important takeaways of things they did not do.
And things that they did do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to look at a couple of secretariat areas and just highlight a few things that they, like John said, they did or did not do. Under compensation and retirement, no funding for salary increases for state employees was provided for constitutional officers and their employees. No additional funding was included for jail per diems and jail overcrowding. There was elimination of targeted salary increases for high turnover positions and career development salary steps. They did include salary adjustments for assistant Commonwealth attorneys effective the 1st of this month, which was about a little over $3.3 million. The state share of funding to increase employer teacher retirement contribution to the rate of 14.5% was included, moving the contribution rate from 70% to 80% of the VRS board certified rates. And they are assuming that by 1920, they'll be at 100% of the board certified rate. OPEB funding for teachers was decreased to 90% of certified rates.
And said it differently, funding their OPEB.
And the teacher retiree credit and health credit, they set it at 1.6% and group life at 1.9%, giving the employee share, the employee rate of 0.7% and employee rate of 48%. And this in turn will decrease cost to localities for this year, but it's going to increase the unfunded liability that's shown on our balance sheets.
I have no idea what that is.
Carol?
In the schools, the state provides part of the cost of a retiree's health insurance, and it's based on tenure. Okay? And I don't know precisely what the formula is, and we can get that for you. But let's say you got to be in the school system for X period of years, let's say 10, and then they will pay a portion of your post-retirement health benefit.
Thank you. Next, go ahead. Another question?
No, go ahead.
Okay. The next area is police. The 599 funding.
To the seat.
I'm sorry.
Is that forever?
Well, yeah, I mean, as long as that person's retired, yeah. I mean, it's a nice benefit.
Yeah.
Till they expire.
Yeah, right.
The police 599 funding in the approved budget, local police departments are being funded at the FY14 level over the biennium. And so for Portsmouth, that amounted to about $5.7 million. Economic and community development, in that area, the budget provides $35,015 to assist the Commission on Local Government in reviewing legislation to determine local fiscal impacts. It also provided $70,000 each year to restore planning district commission cuts that were in the introduced budget. The budget cuts $4 million each year in housing trust funds and eliminates $1 million in 16 for developing wind energy. And they also cut the enterprise zone by $2 million by each year over the biennium. However, the reforecast changes and things look better. Those funds could possibly be restored in the caboose budget bill in 15. But for the current fiscal year, the proration is going to be about 10%. And if not restored, proration going forward is going to be even greater over the next biennium.
Now, you know what the caboose bill is? The caboose bill is the bill they consider for the end of the fiscal year. For example, not only were they considering the adoption of this budget for 14-16, they also were looking at any budget amendments that they had to do for the budget that was 12-14. And to get those in place before the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, 2014. That's the caboose bill.
Thank you, John. Under the Finance Secretariat, the budget estimates of $59.9 million deposit in fiscal year 16 to take into account the downward revisions of the February revenue reforecast. So they eliminated that deposit. The budget does not address or make changes to assist localities with unfunded liability in the teachers' retirement plans, or VRS. line of duty benefits, or the mandated deposits of local fines and fees. $750,000 each year was cut from the school resource officers program. Provides $302,151 in 15 and $212,151 in 16, for, well, million, I guess, for 3 full-time full-time positions for the state to review local disaster preparedness plans as required by Senate Bill 381 and House Bill 730. And there was budget language from the introduced bill included prohibiting approval or commitment of additional funds for the state share of construction, enlargement, or renovation of local or regional detention centers, group homes, or related facilities.
Let me ask the chief, that 750,000 man cut out of the school resource officers, can we make up for that? Or we're gonna have to make up for it, right?
Our school resource officers are all funded by the police department's budget. We don't,
So that doesn't affect us?
Doesn't affect us.
At all? Okay, good.
Moving to the next secretariat area for natural resources. Language was included authorizing Department of Environmental Quality to use available funding to work with the Virginia Geographic Information Network to provide better data to support local stormwater programs and activities to manage recurrent coastal flooding. They shifted $20 million in bond authority from 16 to 15 for grants to localities for stormwater improvements, which includes language requiring that every locality with a stormwater management utility fee to report to the Department of Environmental Quality the programs funded by these fees and the expected pollutants removed by each program. Included in this amendment is the requirement that each locality with a stormwater utility fee certify to the Auditor of Public Accounts in its annual reporting requirements that the funds collected are used in compliance with state law. And then they have $6.5 million from the Water Quality Improvement Fund, was provided in 15 for grants to local governments to assist with the development and management of stormwater programs.
And I know this is about as exciting as watching paint dry. But the budget is more than numbers. It's got a lot of language, and often, instead of bending the state code, they'll go ahead and make something that have the effect of law, but putting it into the budget bill. And so you'll go through, and there'll be long paragraphs of narrative, and there'll maybe a number at the top of the page on appropriation numbers. But that in effect becomes law. And this does have an impact on us. What it says is that when you charge a stormwater fee, you got to prove that you're using the money for that. Okay.
We're almost through.
Yeah.
Under Transportation Secretariat, language amendment directing the Secretary of Transportation to recommend methods to provide assistance for local transportation projects is due by December 1st. And they also included a language amendment directing the Secretary of Transportation to investigate methods through which to fund the replacement of our Churchland Bridge. And report to the Chairman of the House Appropriations and the Senate Finance Committee Chairman the feasibility of including federal and state funding for the project in the 6-year improvement program by October 1st, 2014. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it has been included in the 6-year project. Yeah, program, yeah. And then finally, there's a new program that came out. This is one that Virginia First Cities, excuse me, we work with them because we are, as you know, we are members. It's a primary extension paving fund. It's a grant that is effective as the first of this month, where municipalities can receive a portion of the reconstruction and paving allocations previously only distributed to interstates and primary roads with a combined condition index of less than 60. Excuse me. Moving on to Health and Human Resources.
It is what it is.
No language was included to fund increased foster care rates. Funding was reduced by $1.38 million for, and at 16 for youth 18 to 21, who are anticipated to be covered by federal subsidies. Medical costs related to involuntary mental health commitments was reduced. Included was 15 new disability waivers and 50 intellectual development waivers, in 15 and 16. And then skipping on down to the last bullet, $500,000 TANF dollars in 15 and The same amount of state funds will be used in 16 to expand services provided by community action agencies. Under K-12 public education, they did not address the inflation rates and funding non-personnel support costs. It does not include hold harmless funding due to changes in re-benchmarking. Funding eliminated for Opportunity Educational Institution, which you remember we were all opposed to. And since the Norfolk court case came out and the judge ruled against it, it's been defunded. Excuse me. It provided an additional $1 million in 15 and $3.6 million in 16 for the Virginia Preschool Initiative. And this funding was going to pay for about a third of the hold harmless slots. And the 16 funding will cover the same number as the slots in 14. So this is another Virginia First Cities initiative. And I think Portsmouth was looking at about 365 slots, somewhere in there. So it was helpful to us. Increased extended school year funding by $1 million in 15 and $2.4 million in 16 over the introduced budget to provide startup grants of $300,000 per school year and planning grants of $500,000 per school division for extended school years for those localities that want to do that, which was another VFC initiative. And under other education level funds, you can see where else they removed spending, and that included aid to local libraries. So,
But the key thing is that there is more money for
sorry.
K through 12. And the next slide will show you the impact on Portsmouth.
These are for K-12, for Portsmouth Direct Aid. These are some of the key data. You can read through this at your leisure. The bottom line is that the estimated distribution from the state for 16 is 15. Sorry, I went ahead of myself. And that is 293,717, and the estimated local contribution is 26,134,712. And of course, we always pay, all localities pay even more than what the state says is our share.
All right, let's go to the next slide.
And for 16, the bottom line, you see the numbers there for the estimated distributions again.
Were they flat, or was that a decrease from 15 to 16? The 90 million, was it 90 million before?
It was
A slight increase.
It's a slight increase of $400,000.
Slight increase.
So, moving toward the end. So what triggers an official revenue reforecast? So under provisions of Title 2.2, within 5 days of the close of the fiscal year, the state controller must certify whether the official revenue forecast was met. And generally that occurs around the 9th of the month, so that'll be sometime this week. If the total revenue collections are 1% or more below the forecast, the governor is required to prepare a reestimate of the general fund revenues for the new biennium. And this reestimate must be provided to the General Assembly no later than the 1st of September. The Constitution requires that a revised revenue forecast indicate that the difference between the general fund appropriations and in an adopted budget and the revised forecast exceeds 2% of the prior year of collections in order to access the rainy day fund. The language limits withdrawals from the fund in any fiscal year to lesser than 1/2 of the shortfall or 1/2 of the fund balance. So the estimated fund balance after FY15 deposit is going to be about $940 million. This means that in 15, the potential 1/2 of the problem could be addressed, and half of the fund would be used for about $470 million. And in 16, the use of the rainy day fund would most likely be limited by the second measure, 1/2 of the fund. So in summary, the amended and enrolled budget preserves most of the mandatory spending, includes a reserve fund of $842 million, and retains the ability of the General Assembly to assess the rainy day fund during the 15th session, assuming that the constitutional triggers are met. Finally, next steps. As information becomes available regarding the local government programs that are state-supported, the city's adopted budget may need to be revised. Staff will monitor further actions at the state level regarding the revenue report in August and the potential reforecast in September. And staff will continue to advise council as to any adjustments needed to the city's adopted budget.
Now, note that last bullet. I want to give you a quick update on where we are. What's being passed out. Carol, will you come up, please? Is some major revenue reductions that we're seeing now already.
So
Gotcha.
we are 8 days into the current fiscal year, and based on the information that we have so far from the state, coupled with the actual personal property tax book that ended up being assessed at a rate that actually showed a reduction of 3% in our personal property tax versus the estimate that we had been guided by of being flat. We're going to have a $600,000 in personal property tax revenue reduction. Sales taxes.
Explain that.
Remember the car tax, okay?
Well, it's more than the car tax.
Yeah.
It's also, in fact, machinery and tools went down significantly, and we don't completely understand what caused the change, but the assessed values for personal property, instead of remaining flat, went down in total by 3%, most significantly in machinery and tools.
But we also, let's talk about the car tax for a moment, the fact that we know that we get a flat reimbursement. And we have to figure out how much of that, the whole concept was to phase in a total reduction of the car tax. And they got to about 50% before they abandoned that. And so it said, okay, we'll reimburse 50%. And they never got to 100%. We'll reimburse the local governments. And so it's been at that number, the fixed number, for a good long period of time. And each year you've got to determine, is it 50%, is it 51%, if it's 52%. And if you're off by a smidgen the wrong way, you're giving away money. And so that's really why it's important for Carol, the Commissioner of Revenue, and the Treasurer to be really conservative in coming up with that percent.
What's our percent now?
It's, I believe it was about 52% is what we adjusted by. And in total, we're getting back just under $10 million from the state every year. So as John said, we have to work with those constitutional offices to try to estimate what percent will produce a reimbursement from the state, or will produce a reduction of the tax bills that equals what we get from the state. And it's obviously not an exact science. Any amount that we're over or under should be adjusted for in the following years.
So you're saying our projection was too optimistic?
Well, actually, this doesn't have an impact on the revenue reduction. What John is saying is that becomes part of the overall.
It can, yeah. That's why we have to use caution in setting that rate.
And there have been years where that rate was estimated at too aggressively, and when that happens, it means that we are reducing tax bills using local money.
Well, I understand that, but that dynamic has been there, like you said, for a few years now. So what? I don't understand what's driving I take it that this number is annualized projection.
It's done on an annual basis, and
So what's driving that number? Is it the machine and tool tax reduction?
Yes, primarily the machinery and tool tax assessed value was significantly less this year than what it was last year.
Do we know why?
I have not been able to get an explanation as to exactly why. We know we lost a major business. It was the Smithfield Foods, but the reduction appears to be more than would be warranted by the loss of that business. So we're still trying to understand what's happening and why the assessment has changed so much. But also on vehicles, the assessment was lower as well. So again, we need to continue to work with the Commissioner of Revenue to make sure that we have a good understanding of what they're seeing as far as changes in value and how that might translate into our budget projections. And keep in mind too, we use their guidance based on information that they have before the final book is printed.
All total, $1 million.
That's if the trend, this is based on the current trend, right?
That's correct.
You're just projecting this out.
That's correct.
Right, obviously,
8 days in.
well, yes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
8
that's a
days
good
in,
point.
these are the significant items that we know of right now that are weighing negatively on our revenue projections. I mean, we
Can
know
we-
the state budget.
We don't want
Can
to
we
be,
do a realistic annualized projection based on 8 days' worth of data?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
we know when we've
Big-
got a personal property tax book that shows a reduction of 3% instead of being flat, we know that, unless we get some significant supplemental assessments, we know that our revenue is going to come in lower. We know the state adopted a budget where they're projecting state sales tax revenue to be lower than what they had originally estimated based on trends statewide. Now, that could change if the economy picks up and receipts end up improving. Obviously, there's some time between now and when we do our mid-year forecast to assess our overall revenue and see whether there are other areas that might increase and compensate for some or all of this. But we wanted to let you know early that we are already seeing some revenue reductions that concern us, and that we're going to need to keep a close eye on revenue and see whether we need to do any mid-course adjustments along the way.
these are easier to predict than a lot of our other revenues, but it's better to tell you 8 days in
Oh,
as
so they
opposed
have a heads
to
up.
8 days before the end of the year. And we don't want to come across as Chicken Little, but what we're seeing is paralleling what's happening with the state economy. We just, again, if you want to spend $1, make sure you got that dollar in your hand, and make sure that if that's a reoccurring dollar, that dollar is going to be there the next year and the next year and the next year.
Very good.
And for sure, because I've gotten a little bit of feedback from you guys, I've seen it both in email and orally. We had said in the budget message, let's wait to see what the state's going to do with its budget before we consider constitutional officers. We said that several different times during the course of the budget deliberations, to include the night that you adopted the budget. The state did nothing. And this chart gives you a history of the supplemental funds that you have given the constitutional officers going back to 2001. And it gives it by office. And it's only broken down that way, not to pick on anybody, just so that you can see how those funds are distributed.
So the takeaway, what you're saying is our constitutional officer employees are looking at zero.
That's right.
What-
Unless you want to, if you decide that you want to give additional supplemental funding, and that's what it is, then you're going to have to raise taxes.
in order to give them.
Yes, sir.
How about a bonus?
Well, where are you going to get the money from? Because you're very
Well,
thin.
I'm asking, is
I
there?
would not recommend that you do anything unless you got the revenue for it.
And remember, we just discussed last night that the schools want to make sure that we have enough money set aside
Cover.
to backstop any claim costs over and above what their projections are, so we need to keep that in mind.
We actually did that letter, okay, is it signed? Well, will be, yes, ma'am.
Gone.
Why does this look like, maybe my eyes are deceiving me, that of all of them, the funding for the treasurer's employees have gone down the last 2 years? It looks like the others are
Remember, this is
the same, but the treasurer's office
average
has gone
per
down.
position. So it could be, if the positions are shrinking, but the money stays the same, then the amount per position goes up. If,
Well, it may be because we gave them some extra positions, so there's more positions averaged in. You know, we gave treasurers 3 more bodies last year. So that's probably some of it.
And I think
But it's per position.
And the
Yeah.
commissioner revenue,
But if you-
theirs has been flat.
all right, if you've got,
for a
you
number
got
of years.
$100 and only 2 positions, then it's $50 per position. But if you add 2 more, then it becomes, and don't change.
25. I got it.
Okay.
That's, see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
But you know, we get a good, nice return in services rendered from our deputies.
Yes.
And, I mean, that's a hard pill to swallow. You know, most recently, we've had them, they've been cutting grass out in the cemetery. They do a lot of work for communities, do a lot of work for the city.
I
And
agree.
they're the lowest paid employees in the city.
I agree. I would love to be able to say that everybody that works in this building and that says, I work for the city of Portsmouth, has the same DNA. And I'd love to stand before you and say, yeah, let's give everybody a 3%. But the fact of the matter is that these are constitutional officers, and which means that the state has a responsibility. And the state has said, I'm sorry, we're going to balance the budget, and we're not going to give an increase to our employees. And I appreciate 100%, agree with you 100%. But if you're going to do it wisely.
Okay.
Do it wisely.
I would like to know what it would cost per constitutional officer
For the 3%?
for 3%. Yeah.
Okay, we can do that.
You know, for the treasurer versus the sheriff versus the government
Yeah.
attorney.
And include the clerk of the circuit court up there when you do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not only 3, you know, the 2% that the state didn't give us some options on that.
John, can you do this? Can you
How about I'm sorry.
stop doing that? You do that. No. Can you scrub our vacancies and see, is it the bonus money he talked about, Mr. Moody mentioned? If we have any that we're not going to use the money, and see if they can come, there's some money there. I don't know if there is any. I'm just asking. Can you take a look at that?
I
As
can
a
tell you
plan
that
B.
There's a plan
Yeah.
B for bonuses if we can't do anything else.
your vacancy money is going to have to be your contingency for a shortfall in revenue,
And keep in mind, we already have a vacancy savings that's built into the budget.
automatic.
Several $1 million. I mean, citywide, it's about $4 million that's built in as an assumption that there'll be
You built it in
vacancies.
where to do what?
Pardon me?
You built it in where to do it?
It's a negative, so it's a reduction in every department's budget except for the constitutional offices.
And it's been like that ever since the 80s.
You didn't do it for, you don't do it for constitutional?
Well, remember, last year, we took it out because they're state-funded offices, they tend not to have vacancies. If they have a vacancy, they usually are able to get permission to use that state money to fund part-time help or use it in some other way. So what we were doing by having that vacancy savings built in is essentially causing a situation where they were going to run over budget.
So they have none in their office that you could use?
Correct.
But what we'll do, we'll get in 1% increments, and that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
That would be great.
If you
1,
want to
2,
do
3.
1,
Yeah.
if you want to do 2, if you want to do 3.
That'd be great.
But again, remember, do it wisely.
I'd just like to know whether I'm talking about, you know, $250,000 or
Right.
$25 million. I don't have a grasp of what kind of numbers we're talking about here.
It's fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Doom and gloom.
All right.
Got any good news?
Thanks. Pardon me?
Got any good news?
Well, yeah, we've got some good news. We had a great 4th of July. Despite Arthur, every month, you may know this, we have on first Thursdays, it's not the only time that we gather, but we do have a standing department head meeting. And we kicked off with Arthur being the primary subject of discussion. And you got a series of emails and memos from us talking about our storm preparation. And lucky for us, the only negative thing that it really did was change the date of the Friday activities to the Saturday activities. We ended up, it was more like a northeaster than a hurricane for us. Thank goodness.
Amen.
And probably, in hindsight, everybody could have done their Friday afternoon activities, but hindsight is always really sharp vision. It's always 2020.
At least it wasn't a dark and gothic
well, I'll cover
rain
that.
out.
And what I'd like to do is ask Wanda to come up, and we'll talk about how we rolled. And I'm really proud of these folks because these folks being Parks and Recreation, Properties Management, General Services, Public Works, Police, Fire. It was like doing audible calls at the line of scrimmage. The defense is a different look, and so you have to act accordingly. So once you recap what we had on Saturday.
Certainly. Current council, how are you doing, Mayor, guest, city manager's office? On Saturday, we had all the events we would have had on Friday for 4th of July. So we had the live bands that started at 4 o'clock. And then we had the rondelles come out, raw jazz. And then we had the fireworks. And then immediately after that, we had the caravan show that started about 10 o'clock.
I don't know if you saw, I think Elizabeth was there. We had people all over the Holiday Inn site. And we had food vendors, we had food trucks, we had a good crowd. The bands crescendoed. We had an artist who did paintings, set the music, so every band got up there, ended up getting at least one campus, if not more. Children of all ages. It was really family-oriented and family entertainment, and that's what our goal was to make this whole weekend family-oriented. In fact, the caravan ship came in on Thursday, okay, and it was scheduled to do its first performance on Saturday. There was a strong debate whether or not that was going to take place on their part. In fact, it did. We got it scheduled for 10 o'clock. So the fireworks finished about 9:45. And I want you to walk in your mind with me. You're walking from the Holiday Inn site, and you're walking south on Water Street. You're walking towards High Street. And I'm telling my wife, I'm concerned about crowd control because it looked like the whole Holiday Inn site was evacuating to the foot of High Street, which is a good thing. But I'm wondering if we're prepared at that end for crowd control. You know, what happens if someone yells fire in the theater and we don't want people to panic. So people get settled, and I'm first looking to set up in the Coast Guard, when I say set up, two chairs, Coast Guard parking lot, and I moved over towards in front of the Shipyard Museum, so I'm now at the bow of the boat. We had a good crowd. It was standing room only crowd. It was almost shoulder to shoulder. And then the show started. And right from the very first, we're all taking our Blackberries and smartphones out, communicating with each other about the fact that this is not what we expected, that this is not family entertainment. This is not the show that we had researched. And the crowd was coming to the same conclusion, because within a very short period of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, they had voted with their feet. They had left. And what ended up being a crowd where people were jostling to, try to get to look at the show became very sparse. Now the ship had a scrim. You know what a scrim is? It's like a gauze that goes between the performers and the audience. And you can see through it, but you can also project images. And from the angle that I had, remember I'm at the bow of the ship, I could see that there was something being projected, but I couldn't see all that was being projected on the screen. I could hear the dialogue. The dialogue was not family oriented. Now, this wasn't an X-rated show, but it's not the Circus Olay that we were looking to have, and that we researched. And as we'll tell you tonight, we called other cities. This troupe was overseas 8 months before they came here. And I can tell you, frankly, that had we been able to go to wherever they were overseas, and if this was the same show, and previewed it, we would not have invited them. We signed the contract when?
May the 19th.
May the 19th. They were still overseas on May the 19th. So we have a situation where we're quickly doing an assessment that's both on the street, face-to-face, and by telephone. Now, why don't you go into a little bit more of the narrative, if you will.
Well, first let me say that, our goal is certainly, Parks and Recreation, is to provide quality programs and services that enhance the community. So we've spent a lot of time researching and doing a lot of events on Fridays and Saturdays and movies at the parks that are preemptively wonderful for the city. So our goal is to make our city better and have a small city feel with big city benefits. So when the whole issue of the show was brought to us, the whole point was Cirque du Soleil, fun, entertaining, and something different and artistic for the city. But what we received instead was a very dark, gothic, avant-garde show that was very offensive to people. I mean, one of the first scenes that we saw was a young lady in a cage with a noose around her neck. That's unacceptable. I mean, and the language was unacceptable. I mean, the images, what was on our contract said, hacked treasure of the seas, but what was on the ship when it came in was House of Horrors. That's not what was depicted to us. So I want to apologize to all of you, because I know it's our responsibility as staff to do a good job and provide you with good services. So I'm sorry I let my city down.
No, not you. I'm the one that signed the contract. So this is a corporate thing, folks. I mean, please don't misunderstand. I take responsibility for this. We thought we were getting one thing. Our research showed that we were getting something else. And it showed the same expectation. The actual performance was not what we expected.
At all.
At all.
And even the website was beautiful and, nice ladies on, on the ribbons and colorful and light and sunny, but the show was dark and scary. So we thought it best to listen to our customers and listen to you and counsel it before, because we don't want to, as a city, encourage something negative or ugly or dark or wrong.
Yeah.
So we are doing everything we can to.
We had pretty
correct
much
that.
decided that night to pull the plug, and I told everybody, let's sleep on it. Because, not that we needed a good night's rest, but who would you turn to? I mean, the show people were in the process of making sure that they got everything
Battened down.
battened down. So bright and early Sunday morning, we made the decision before Sunday school, to cancel the rest of the show. And it was very nicely done. We tried to contact the performers at 10 o'clock or before 10. And we made telephone calls that were not answered. And so, knowing that people would be going to church, we picked 2 o'clock. And my goal was to get back downtown after church by 2. I got there about 2:11, and it was a group. Nita was there, Valora was there, you were there. I think, Tony, you were there. And it was so nicely done by
Mike
Nita.
Stockton from,
And Nita's lost her voice.
so she's miming over there?
Yeah, she's, come on over here, Nita. Nita said, it's no reflection on your ability as a artist. That we're not saying that you don't have the performing skills to do this acrobatic stuff. But it's not the show that we expected. And that had we been able to preview your show, we wouldn't have invited you. We wouldn't have said yes to your ask, can you perform here? And
Why weren't we able to preview it? Did they not have
they
something?
were in Europe.
But they didn't have discs or something they send you to
No,
look at?
no, and they changed the show too. And what was on their website was not this performance, okay? What was depicted both in video and still images was not anything close to this performance.
And that was on the website. So what we saw on the website, I'm sorry, sir.
Since we didn't get what was advertised and what they said they were going to deliver to us, is there anything in the agreement, do we have any recourse where we can
We'll check it out, but
get our money back?
we'll check it out.
What was the price?
10,000.
10,000?
Yeah.
That
And
includes-
it's like, bringing any performance here. Sometimes a performance will come here and tell us that we'll need a guarantee that they're looking for a threshold amount of money. Here was a case where we essentially said, we're buying everybody's ticket. Come downtown and enjoy this family entertainment.
Sure.
And it
I want to
didn't-
commend you all for using that type of judgment to stop it, because if you allowed it to go on, it'd be a big uproar. But
Yeah.
I think you handled it well. Couldn't have handled it any better.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to comment because I was in the thick of this. Right decision. Scary show would have been great for some people who wanted to buy a ticket to that kind of show at a very avant-garde theater. Not right for Portsmouth. But these girls and guys, I physically watch for 48 hours work their tails off downtown in the heat and reorganizing to redo something on no notice and get entertainment down and deal with some unruly artistic folks whose feelings were hurt. And they did a really good job. Backing up Bishop, but they did a great job.
And I agree with the pulling of the plug. I think we did the right thing. It just seems like we were sold a bill of goods, and I would at least like to look at the agreements if we haven't already paid them to see if we could withhold some money.
I think they
But
did.
we did have a great weekend, and both Sunday and Monday night, we had the same concept. We made it a block party. And let me take you a weekend ahead. Would you like to talk about what? I want you to talk about.
I'm just glad you
Sir?
guys were able to pull that together so quick, because it was nice down there on Sunday and everything.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you did it that quickly and got a group of that quality there. Because usually they're booked up, but they were very good, and everyone seemed to be having a great time when I was down there. So
The
And
whole
I
goal
think we've
was,
taken away some lessons learned here,
yeah.
and
definitely.
I hear what Bill is saying about reviewing that contract, but I think we learned the lesson, and I don't know if I would want to chase that rabbit.
Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time, a lot of legal money, but I think we need to let them know that, listen, you told us we were getting this product, and we got another product that wasn't suitable for our audience. So
Yeah.
I think since it's $10,000 involved and it's not our money, it's tax money, I think we should at least ask the question.
One of the good things, they have changed their website since they've been in port.
Yeah, I helped them.
You could go as late, because I scratched my head when I got home. You better believe one of the first things I did after our conference telephone call that was on the street again was to go to the website. And I'm thinking, that's not what I saw. And,
Magical.
Yeah, so it's been changed.
What was the change to the website?
The change was to make it current to this show.
Okay.
Not the one that was before, that was magical and beautiful and light. So it talks about more satirical political statement about.
Yeah, and there's the change that I think we should question. It's like you think you're buying a red car and you end up getting a polka dotted car.
Now, we called other cities and talked to them and just didn't do our research on the site. And the comments we got back, great show, yeah. All right, but let's talk, I want you to know what's coming up next week.
Please.
This Friday night and Saturday, we have a wine down at Portside. So we have Williamsburg Winery coming in to do tastings of different types of wines, and you can buy bottles of wine. And we also have a program called Eat the Streets that originated in Richmond. So we have all these different food vendors coming in. So you can taste Korean food and Asian food. Just try not to say the truck word, but so we have all these vendors coming in this weekend. So we'll have live music and have all different kinds of foods you can taste and activities for kids, both Friday and Saturday. So please come down and enjoy something wonderful. There'll be no magic people flying across the stage. It'll just be.
Is that the Portside or the Holiday Inn site?
That's going to be at Portside.
Portside. Yeah. Very
Thank
good.
you so much.
Before you take your seat, Dr. Gill, let me just say I admire your professionalism in all this.
Thank you.
Think she's ready?
Okay.
We got one more on the agenda?
Is that it? Okay. Go ahead.
No.
Oh, okay.
One more item.
Andre, auditor, please.
You have a PowerPoint? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Good.
Dead trees.
This is good. I'll just go. Okay. Don't get close to me.
Yeah, no.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor Wright, Mayor Cherry, and the rest of the council. This is my opportunity to present the first annual audit plan for Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Jesse, you want lights on? Andre?
Yes.
You want lights on?
Yes, that's good. Thank you. Okay, I presented to council on June 24th the original audit plan. The audit plan that I just presented to you has just been amended slightly. I had to reverse the order of some of the audits because of an understanding that utilities was going through a little bit of a change, so I was going to start with them. and so I've moved them to another section.
Okay.
All right, so first of all, I want to start off by saying the Office of the City Auditor. I want to talk about the responsibilities for the position. As the Office of the City Auditor is an independent appraisal function responsible for financial attestation engagements and performance audits of city programs, functions, and activities. Other responsibilities include the coordination of the city's fraud, waste, and abuse prevention hotline. In coming up with the annual audit plan, I went through a risk assessment. And the risk assessment looked at identifying significant auditable entities. I sought input from council members as far as audits that they thought would be beneficial for the city. And then I performed a citywide risk assessment of all audited entities based on budgeted permanent positions, budgeted dollars, council inquiry, and noted audit issues. So over the past year, I've looked into some areas and noticed some areas that I thought would be of benefit to audit. And I included that into my risk assessment. Take a step back. There are two types of audits that will be done. There are performance audits, which are more department-wide type of audits. And they are based on trying to assess the quality of performance by city agencies and functions in carrying out their assigned responsibilities. The scope of those audits may include the entire agency or some portion thereof, such as a specific program or function. The other type of audit is the attestation engagements. The attestation engagements are agreed upon procedures where you work with the department and say, I want to look at a specific area. And the audit is based off of that agreement. All the audits on the 2015 audit plan, as it is currently scheduled, are performance audits. And the way each audit will be laid out as far as a performance audit, it will start with the purpose. It will move to the scope and objectives, methodology, standards, background, results, findings, and then recommendations. At the end, management will be given a chance to respond, and they will be given 30 days to respond to those recommendations. And that will be included in the audit. So to get to the actual meat of what the audit plan is.
Before you do that, once they get the 30 days to respond, we still need a follow-up session to make sure that they actually implemented whatever recommendations that were made, correct?
That is correct.
So there's an ongoing check in place to make sure that whatever we've discovered, good or bad, is corrected, not only just 30 days responding, right?
That's correct. And in general, that could be in the following year's audit plan to go back and review those recommendations. But we can shorten that period and say every 6 months we'll go back or 9 months or 90 days.
Perfect.
Okay. The first audit would be of the Portsmouth Police Department compound. That start date is anticipated to be July 9th, tomorrow. Estimated fieldwork completion date will be August 30th, 2014. Estimated reporting date, September 10th, 2014. And the resource requirements, the hours that will be needed is right at 400 hours for that project. This was switched from our original audit plan. It was actually going to be the second audit, but because, as I said, there were some issues with some changes going on in the utilities, I switched the order of those things. So the second audit will be of the public utilities and focusing on billing and customer service. The start date will be September 10th, 2014. Estimated fieldwork completion date is November 5th, 2014. And estimated reporting date is November 14th, 2014. And that's 376 hours. As you notice with both of those audits, I'm looking at a specific area within a department and not the whole department. The larger audit will be the behavioral health care services. And that start date is anticipated to be November 14th, 2014. It will run, the fieldwork completion date is expected to be June 30th, 2015. An estimated reporting date is July 13, 2015, and it would incorporate 1,376 hours. The objective of the compound audit is to determine whether the Portsmouth Police Department has a strong internal control structure for cash handling, inventory tracking, and asset security. In addition, I will review the process of the mechanism of choosing the towing companies or how the towing company fees are assessed. The office will also attempt to identify and address any problem areas as determined by the office. So if I come across some issues that I have not laid out in this particular format, there may be an opportunity to pursue those issues. I will talk to the audit committee and advise them of the issues and if we want to go forward. Public utilities billing and customer service is to evaluate whether public utilities are providing service in an economical, efficient, and effective manner, whether its goals are being achieved, and whether it's complying with applicable city procedures. Again, the city auditor's office will attempt to identify performance information that appears to be relevant to the department's operations, and any issues that are identified that have not been specifically disclosed may be pursued within the audit. The larger one is to evaluate behavioral health services and to understand whether they're providing service in an economical, efficient, and effective manner, where the goals and objectives are being achieved. The audit will focus on divisions of behavioral health services, including administration, mental health, intellectual disability, substance abuse, and community service grants which will be subject to evaluation. The city auditor will attempt to identify performance information that appears to be relevant to the department's operations. I will also attempt to identify and address any additional problem areas as requested by behavioral health services or determined from the audit itself. I put a graph here to kind of give council an idea of the allocated hours. Again, it would start with the Portsmouth Police Department. 160 hours are expected to be used in July for that, 168 in August, and 64 in September. You can follow along with the other hours as far as basically what it's showing is that the Portsmouth Police Department compound will run from July to September, start winding down in September, then start with the utilities, which will start winding down at the end of November and move into behavioral health services. The city auditor's office will continue to administer calls received from the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. That number is 393-8678. I also initiated a request to information technology to develop a report that will be used to identify if any calls have come into that hotline. And that report, if made available, they're still researching whether that can be done. But that report will serve as a check on me. So if I report that there was 10 calls, you have a report that says, yep, there were 10 calls and he reported on those 10 calls. So that's what I'm trying to.
Did we get that on the front page of the website?
We did.
I went back, there are no current calls on the hotline. I went back for a year. There have not been any calls.
Nobody knew we had one.
Nobody knew we had one. So.
Oh, they'll give it work over
And,
there.
did we change the name? Because I'm looking at our website now, and it's kind of buried in with other numbers, and it says fraud hotline. It doesn't say anything about employee abuse, waste,
But this day
or
has
anything.
changed. New beginning.
Hence no action, probably.
Okay.
And hopefully because it's not needed, but
Well-
I think it's kind of hard to find. And it needs to mirror what it is in the verbiage.
Okay, we're definitely looking to change that. Some of the additional objectives that I would like to work on over the next 45 days would be to develop a plan of action to improve employee and citizen awareness of the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline, to your point. A few examples may be placards that we could put maybe in the bathrooms and stuff, and different places around the city so that people would be aware of the number. I'm working on developing a quarterly audit committee schedule, which the audit committee would be composed of Mayor Wright and Vice Mayor Cherry. And also to continue to develop a more robust risk assessment program to include risk factors such as complexity of operations, regulatory compliance, turnover of key personnel, public image, rapid growth, and financial exposure. If there are any questions,
Yeah, I got actually a couple, and I appreciate you putting this together and giving us the layout that you have there, but walk me through just on a high level, because I mean, I'm engineer by trade. I believe in procedures and policies and all that. You're going to go into places in this city, and people are going to be doing things, and there's probably going to be nothing written down that says what they do
Right.
or how they do it.
Right.
Which is going to derail some of what you're trying to do. I mean, and just by nature, I mean, I believe we need policies for all that, and hopefully we do have that. Maybe one of the real takeaways is that if we don't have things in place to shore up what we ought to be doing, these type of things will help us get there. I mean, you pick the compound. I mean, how do you determine, first of all, you need to go read, how does this compound operate?
Sure.
How does a vehicle get in and out of here? And you're going to interview and talk to the department head?
that's the way, yes.
Will you select people within it to see if they jive up with what the department head tells you, and then you go and actually witness vehicles and things coming in and out and say, okay, and make an observation?
Your engineering background serves you well. So what you would actually start with would be, do you have policies and procedures? Then you would talk to the department head. And what you're trying to do when you talk to the department head is say, where are your key risks and where are your key controls? Where do you think you're able to catch the problems that could exist within a department? So for instance,
What are the risks to the city?
That's right. Did that transaction actually occur? How do you know it occurred? How do you know it's accurate, the number that you have down as far as dollar amount for that transaction? How do you know it was properly approved or authorized? What are the checks and balances that you have in place? So that's what you would start with the department head doing. Now, the next step you would do is go through what you would call a walkthrough. You would ask, who are your key personnel who go through this on a day-to-day basis? And you would contact them, sit down with them, and walk through actually what they do. And this is probably where you're going to find your most information. You're going to talk to those key personnel and say, okay, tell me what really goes on, you know? And you might get insight into, well, it's supposed to work like this, but this is actually how it works. Again, you're trying to find out what are the key controls that gives you security that what you put down as far as that transaction occurring, it actually occurred. So, so then as you walk through with the key personnel and they disclose what they do and they show you what they do, you would then go back and test those key controls and see, did it work last week? Did it work this week? Does the paperwork show proper approval? Does the paperwork show that the activity actually occurred? And you would move from there, and then you come up with.
So while you're doing that, naturally you want to be mindful and respectful of the different department heads, but you need to somehow pop up unannounced to see some things without acting like you're being sneaky. In other words, if a car goes through some gadget and every time you're there with the department head, the gadget light goes off.
Right.
You show up next week without him and the light doesn't go off. I mean, I'm trying to oversimplify it, but will you have those type of events where you would come back and want to just do a walkthrough by yourself and see things without them?
I think you're getting into more of the testing. The walkthrough is really going to be with somebody because you're walking through the process to see how the process works from beginning to end. When you test, you're going to test independently. So you will find out a lot of things. You find out how it's supposed to work, and then you would test independently to see, is it working like that? I think
I think that's what I'm referring to, the test phase of it, because you want to go and make sure folks on the shop floor or out in the street are saying the same thing that the director said, here's what we do, here's how we do it, and when I run into a case like this, I do this, and those type of things, right? And then,
Right. You would start off with how the department thinks it's supposed to work, and that's usually tied into the policies and procedures. You would then work with the staff members and see how they do their day-to-day job and see if they actually jives with the policies and procedures and what the department head said. And that could be a finding, that no, it doesn't work that way. It could be a finding that you start off that there are no policies and procedures. That could be a finding from the very beginning. I think one of the things that I want to get across and at the help of the council is that if the department head understands that I'm not coming in there to be the gotcha guy,
Right.
I don't think that serves a really good purpose.
No.
I think where I want to go with this is that we're trying to improve. You know, we started this place, we move forward to a better place.
Correct.
And that's the point of audit, you know. So, yeah, if that answers your question, you start from the department head, trying to get an overview of how the department should work. You go into the weeds of how the actual staff goes about doing their job, see if there's any difference in that, and then you test those controls, particularly the ones that they think are key. So, one of the great analogies I've heard is that, let's say you're trying to test to see if you can be at your job at 8 o'clock, right? So one of the tests might be, one of the controls may be that you have an alarm clock, okay? Is that a key control? Could be. It might not be. If you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, you don't need the alarm clock. But if you are a heavy sleeper, maybe you need the alarm clock. So the control is the alarm clock. The test will be, is the alarm clock working? Is it plugged in? Is it loud enough? And you would go from that. So I would start off with, what is the key control to get you up to this, to go to this particular event? That would be what the department head would tell you. Then I may monitor you for a night to see if, hey, did the alarm clock go off? Then I might test the alarm clock and come up with a finding and recommendation.
and the reason for my line of question is because we haven't had this position, and because most of us, my business, most businesses, people that come in, somebody trains them and they do what somebody else told them.
Right.
Very few of them have ever seen the procedures or understood what they're supposed to do, and it's going to be difficult. I just honestly feel that, not that we don't have procedures and we're running all out of control, but I just think jumping into something like this is going to be difficult, because I think you'll run into a lot of people that we used to call it work off the old black book in the shipyard. There's some guy with everything in his back pocket and there's no procedure that says what that old guy with the book does, and all the young people are being trained by that guy. And how do you make sure you translate all that stuff so you get away with all of these gurus and you got something for future advancement for people that want to learn how to go from one part of the shop to another, and it isn't because he likes the boss and all that stuff? Is that too much outside of the realm of what the auditor could do? In other words, I want a guy to come in and be able to...
Because you're talking about my operation. Okay. We don't lack for procedures. I mean, that is one of the inherent things about a bureaucracy. And whether or not we like that term or not, we are a bureaucracy, and we got a procedure for just about everything. Okay. The question is the procedure good?
That's right.
And I have a long experience in working with internal auditors, and the whole notion of the gotcha, and I'm glad you used that term, is the wrong notion.
Yeah, that's right.
It's about improving our systems, our procedures, to make sure that, are they current? They reflect any technology changes? Are they working for the year 2014? So it's
But that's got to be driven all the way down to the shop floor, though, because if we up here talk about improvements, but the mechanic thinks you're here to find out that he's not turning this thing left instead of right, and he gets all nervous and further. And that's got to be him and his management team driving that all the way down, that we're here to help. There is nobody here trying to play gotcha, or if there's something that we find, it's not going to be something that you're going to broadcast everywhere, just, this is why we're doing this. And if you don't drive that down, then it's going to make your
But
job
that's
very difficult.
That's my responsibility. I
Well,
don't
yours,
think that
Deborah's, Janie's, George's, wherever he goes, you've got to make sure that you drive that down, because he's going to have our full support as a council to go into not only these areas, but anywhere else that we may deem that we want him to look into. So that's the purpose of the schedule, but we want to make sure that we understand this is a collaborative effort, and we want to make sure it is driven down to wherever you need to drill to any of these areas, that we make sure that we're trying to do it's positive, not the gotcha thing. I mean,
Even with things that may not rise to the level of audit, but some kind of review that we may need done. But it's important. I think what John just said is very important coming from him, because he's the.
That's right.
Because most of these 2,000 employees
They're gonna be
somehow
under him.
funneled up to him. That he has his full support, and that you're coming as he's going as the city council. It's like we walk in the door asking the questions, so they should be giving them their full support and cooperation.
In addition to you signing off on his schedule, another takeaway tonight ought to be that first, we've got tons of procedures. We're always looking to make sure that they're refined, and that's where this partnership comes in. A case in point, you mentioned the utilities. We're shifting the utility operation off the first floor. Why? Because the registrar is operating under new laws and needs the space. And so what we want to do is move the back office stuff to the second floor, and it only makes sense that you take cash at one place, and that's at the treasurer's window. I never really did understand why we got cash taken in over here at the city treasurer and over here at the utilities. So as we make that transition, I would want Andre to take a look at do the internal controls that we're writing as our procedure work.
very good.
For example, we're going to have a little interesting development with credit cards. We take credit cards now. I mean, you can pay with a credit card. We eat the fee. Jimmy passes the fee on. And so we need a way to work around that, and a way that makes sense procedurally. Okay?
And finally, before I leave a couple of them, we just did the exact same thing about a year ago at HRT. And we got a flood of people calling hotlines, people giving you data that you don't really need. I'm sure you're professional enough to know what's usable and what somebody's trying to get their boss in trouble or get their coworker in trouble. I mean, but we got a flood of those type of things, and that's going to happen with anybody. The minute you change that website and put that outline up there, so it's visible, and we want to make sure that we're not using your office or this council or what we're doing here for the betterment of our citizens and operations for someone to use it to play gotcha. And that's just as important. And that doesn't mean diminishing anyone's hotline, but you're going to get into a whole lot of drama. I mean,
I understand that. I also know.
well, coming from a big corporation, I'm sure you're aware of that. But
Yes, and I also know that your biggest tips come from those hotlines.
Right.
So although you do have to go through a lot of stuff, the ones that are most important many times come through that hotline. So, you take it seriously and try to, move forward.
Standard work year is 28, and you got 2114. We're not paying any overtime. Okay. Just. He's exempt. Okay, good. Well, go ahead. Do 22.
Knock yourself out.
Well, those hours are based off of from.
any other
calculate
questions or
on work
comments? All right. Thank you. Good job, sir.
Okay.
I believe we got a motion to go into close.
Move to go into closed meeting pursuant to provisions of Virginia Code Section 2.23711 for the following purpose. Discussion concerning the performance of council appointees as permitted under subsection A1.
Mr. Cherry?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Meeks is absent. Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes.
Commissioner Randall's absent. Mayor Wright.
Yes.
We are enclosed. Thank you.
Thank you.